So 18 months ago, I was trying to run an agency. And at the time, I would kind of hedge my bets. Like we'd be doing some stuff for these sort of clients. We'd be doing some marketing stuff. And then some things are just for like entrepreneurs that want to start a podcast. I was putting my bets everywhere. And I had to reflect on it. And I realized it was fundamentally like a lack of confidence. I didn't have the confidence in what I was doing. So I was trying to appeal to everyone because I was like, someone will take it. Yeah. And so I think the way that you use words is intentional and it's important. You say the smallest viable market. And so I think each of those words is important. Smallest viable market. And so how does someone, if they're listening to this and they're at a point in their business where they're kind of trying to appeal to everyone, they're in the same situation I was in, how do they make that decision with confidence of like, no, I'm going to disregard all of these people who are, maybe they're even paying me money right now because I'm only meant to appeal to that. Like, how do I get to that level of, how do I make that decision?
Well, we should talk about decisions in a minute, but to pick up the agency example, if I had to start an agency today, I would build an agency, for example, that only works with pediatric orthodontists. If you're not a pediatric orthodontist, I'm not going to build your website and I'm not going to help you get the word out. I only work with pediatric orthodontists. By the time I've got 4 clients and I've proven that I'm effective, there's going to be a line out the door. Because pediatric orthodontists don't want to be innovators. They want to hire the person who's the very best at helping them grow their practice. The end. And once I have 20 clients, I never have to look for work again. I'm done. That's so different than saying you're looking for an agency, we're an agency. You can pick anyone, we're anyone. So it's that emotional shift that we're talking about. But I want to talk about decisions since you brought it up. And this is from my friend Annie Duke. Annie used to be the world poker champion. So tell me, please, have you made a really good decision in the last 3 months? Can you think of one?
Yeah.
Okay. This decision you made, did it turn out well?
It turned out amazingly, yeah.
Yeah, that's what everyone says. That doesn't mean it was a good decision. If you buy a lottery ticket and you win, it was still a stupid decision. Because buying a lottery ticket is for idiots. There's no math that makes sense to buy a lottery ticket. But if it turns out all right, now you think you're really smart. No, you were just lucky. On the other hand, it's entirely possible to make a good decision and have it fail. That if someone decides to get on a plane and fly from here to Toledo and the plane crashes and they die, they didn't make a bad decision. They just got really unlucky. Flying is the safest way in the history of the world to travel. So it was a good decision, but a bad outcome. So how do we decide with confidence? Well, you're probably not going to have confidence. Confidence implies that you know how the future is going to turn out. I'm just saying all the math, all the data, all the history shows that if you want to make something great, you need to make it for someone specific. You need to pick a group of people that's big enough to support you if it works, but not everybody, right? So you probably shouldn't start an ad agency for left-handed, red-haired people who have a monocle, because there just aren't enough of those people that even if you delighted all of them, you're still not going to be able to be in business. But you also shouldn't start a headphone company for everyone who has ears, because that's too big.
You know what? I always say this. I say this seat that I sit in is an interesting one because we've done over 100 episodes at this point, and all of our guests are like phenomenal. They've built incredible things. And so one of the things that's interesting for me is that I start to see patterns. And one of the patterns that I see is that a lot of entrepreneurs start out their businesses in this like experimentation phase where they're just trying a bunch of different things. And they're waiting for that moment where they see like an outlier. They see a spike. They see, we sent this out and it went up.
Right.
And so it feels like there's actually a process to how you go super specific and you make that decision of like, okay, I'm going to go all in on this. Can you speak to that? Because I'm sure that there's someone that's listening, that's like, okay, I trust Seth. I need to go specific. I can tell that this is the right thing, but there's like a lack of awareness of like the process
Sure.
of how you actually get to the specific.
Well, first, please don't trust me. I'm trying very hard to give you all the data you need to make a good decision, but don't do it because I suggested it. With that said, this is an exercise in practical empathy. I am not a cancer survivor. I do not wear pantyhose. I am not 3 years old. But if I want to do something to serve those groups of people, I better show up and see what happens, right? So my speaking career, I've given 5 TED Talks and 1,000 talks around the world, but my first talks were for 6 people. And when you're doing a talk for 6 people, I already know everything I'm going to say. So I'm not judging it on, did I learn something? I'm looking at the eyes of those people. And if I say something and a certain kind of person responds, I'll say more like that. And I'm training them and they're training me at the same time. Once you are in the field doing this, you don't have to raise $50 million and go start a whole company. You just show up and, if you want to be in food service, start a restaurant or something, get a job as a barista first and find out what kind of customer service interactions work on what kind of people, right? That stand-up comics, they get good because they do go to open mic night. Now, what you're learning at open mic night is how do you please people who go to open mic night? And you may decide you can please people at a wedding easier. So now go try that. But this is the experimentation of practical empathy.
I love that. The point about practical empathy, I love that because it's like you're almost looking for that thing that you can see in some people's eyes sometimes. You see that like the light switch on, like you see that light come on. And so I actually think it's a really natural way into step 3, which is the third step is to tell a story that matches the built-in narratives and dreams of that tiny group of people, the smallest viable market. And so like the thing that, and I'm even smiling as I'm saying it because I just think it's so important, to tell a story that matches the built-in narratives and dreams of that tiny group of people. There's so much power in those few words that you just said there. Can you just explain that to people?
So there's a video, I can't remember, Josh Bell. There's a Josh Bell video in the subway system of Washington, D.C. And they gave him a baseball cap. He's a super famous classical pianist. They gave him a baseball cap and had him show up in the subway and play. Everyone walked right by. These are some of the very same people who would happily pay $200 for tickets to see him at the Kennedy Center. But the context mattered. Because in the subway, the mindset of someone is, if there's someone playing music over there, they're not worth me listening to. But if they're on the stage at the symphony, they must be good. Because that's the context that I have been trained to understand and believe in. So there was a period of time a few years ago when some scammers dressed up in the robes of Buddhist monks and stood on the street corners of New York trying to beg for money in an organized way. And they were hauling in a lot of money because they would walk up to somebody and offer them a Zen mindfulness sort of emblem badge. And if they guessed right, and the person they were approaching was someone who was a meditator, someone who'd been on a retreat, someone who understood mindfulness, an exchange just took place. Well, 1, I'm giving the benefit of the doubt to someone in monk's robes. And 2, they gave me something, so I have to reciprocate because that's one of the things that I was trained to do as a little kid. So they're scamming people. They're just keeping the money. But they were doing it by taking advantage of what we already believed. If you showed up dressed that way in 1784 in Abilene, Texas, no one would give you anything because they didn't have a story about Buddhist monks or reciprocity that would work then today, right? So we have to be aware of the context. What are we plugging into? What does it mean to buy a Super Bowl ad? Buying a Super Bowl ad is almost always a terrible decision, but it sends a signal to certain groups of people because of what we've come to expect from Super Bowl ads, not because they work.
Okay, so if you enjoyed this episode, you're going to absolutely love what we did with this one right here. Click here.